Hello. In this video, we'll walk through simple step-by-step instructions for creating a Q&A bot that your organization or agency can use to help respond to the COVID-19 crisis. Now, to accomplish this, we'll be using Q&A Maker and the Azure Bot Service from Microsoft's Azure Cognitive Services. Now, don't worry. As I said, these are simple instructions aimed at non-developers. Before we get started, there are a couple of things you should have handy. First, you'll need an Azure account in your organization's Azure subscription, and next, you'll need the question and answer content that you want to include in your Q&A bot. So if you already have a web page of COVID-19 frequently asked questions or a COVID-19 Q&A web page, then locate that content and copy those URLs to something like Notepad, so we'll have that for later. If your content is in something like an Excel file, then locate those files, so we'll also have those for later. Now, if you have neither of those, if you haven't even started with content, that's okay. You have two options. You can enter them by hand, manually, after you create the Q&A knowledge base, or you can create a simple Excel file and add your content to that now. So let me gather the content I'm going to use for this walkthrough. I want to show how to include web content in a knowledge base, so I'm going to find a COVID-19 FAQ on the web. So here's the search keywords, and I'll select this document here from the Virginia Department of Health, and here's what it looks like. So I'm going to grab the URL, and I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it into Notepad just to keep it around and have it handy for later. Now, I mentioned earlier not to worry if you didn't have any organization-specific COVID-19 content yet, that you could create some with a simple Excel file. Let me show you what that looks like. So here's the sample Excel file that I created, and you see it's pretty simple. It's just got two columns in it. The first column here is for the questions, and then the second column is for the answers. So pretty basic, and you don't even need the header row if you don't want. For those of you who do have content, later you'll see how well that content imported, and if you're having issues with the Excel file, then you may need to simplify it to the format that you see here. So just so you know, these files are only used initially to populate the knowledge base. Later, you'll either update the knowledge base directly, or you'll use an export file to update the knowledge base. But we'll cover that later when we talk about how to update an existing knowledge base. Okay, now that we're all prepared, let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is to browse to the Q&A Maker portal. It's important to note that the Q&A Maker has its own portal that's separate from the main Azure portal. If you're using Azure Government, you'll need to open a browser and browse to this URL. If you're using Azure Commercial, you'll need to browse to this URL. For this video, I'll be using Azure Commercial, but other than the different URL, both portals look and work exactly the same. So we'll need to sign in, and this is important. Although you'll be signing into the Q&A Maker portal, you'll need to sign in with the same Azure account that you'd use to sign into the Azure portal. Okay, we've now signed into the Q&A Maker portal, and this colorful list here are my current knowledge bases. The two primary Q&A commands are up in the Q&A Maker menu bar. We're going to get started here with the Create a Knowledge Base command. Now, because this video is aimed at non-developers, we're going to limit the technical details to just the ones you need to know to get up and running, and you can dig deeper later to better understand some of these steps. If you want a fuller explanation of these steps, you can do a Bing search and use the keywords Q&A Maker and Azure Government and look for the devblog search result. Now, this video is targeting Azure Government, but as I mentioned before, these steps are the same for both portals, so the fuller explanation there equally applies to what we're doing here. Okay, let's switch back to the Q&A Maker portal. This first step creates all the backing services that Q&A Maker needs to run. Now, don't let this next part confuse you. When I click this button, I'll be sent to the Azure portal to create the backing services, and when we finish, we'll come right back here to pick up with step 2. Okay, so we're now in the Azure portal. Let's use the same name we used for Q&A Maker to name this backing service. There are two pricing tiers, the free F0 and the standard S0. I'm going to use the standard. It's not a bad idea to create a new resource group to hold this backing service. So I'm going to create a new resource group, and I'll call it just the same thing as I'm calling the backing service here. For search indexes, I'll choose 3 indexes, which should be fine for what we're doing here. I'll keep all my services in the same location, and in this case it's East US. The default app name is fine, and likewise I'll move the website location to East US as well. Later I'll use App Insights to monitor this bot, so I'll leave App Insights enabled. Like the others, I'll set App Insights location to East US. With that, we're ready to create the backing service. Now this will just take a moment or two to complete. Okay, looks like it's complete, and now we can switch back to the Q&A Maker portal. Okay, we'll pick back up with step 2, but before we do, we'll hit this refresh button here to make this page aware of the backing service we just created. Now the goal of this step is to connect the Q&A service to the back-end service that we just created. To do that, I'll need to select the correct tenant, and then the subscription. And finally, I'll be able to use this drop-down to find the service that I just created. The last thing for step 2 is to choose the language the knowledge base should understand. Now I'm going to choose English, but you could choose any of these languages, and there's a number to choose from. So on to step 3, and I'm going to be consistent and use the same name that I used to name the back-end service. In step 4, we'll use the things that we gathered in our preparation step. If you'll remember, I saved the URL to Virginia's Department of Health's COVID-19 FAQ. Now, I saved that in this notepad file, so I'm just going to go grab it and copy it. I'm going to paste it into this URL field here. Now earlier I also located the Q&A Excel file that I created, and so I'm going to use this add file link here to import that as well. For this COVID-19 Q&A bot, we're going to ignore the concept of chit-chat, but if you're interested in that topic, you can look at that video that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so we're finally ready to create the knowledge base, so I'll click the Create Your KB button. Okay, this will take a minute to create, but when it's done, we'll be able to see the content that the Q&A Maker service imported. Okay, looks like it's done. So the first thing I'll do is to adjust the view settings so that it's a little easier to see what was imported. So let me choose Hide Context to simplify things a little bit here. Now if I go back to the settings, I can choose Collapse All Sources and more easily see what we just imported. Great. Okay, so those are the two sources that we imported. And if I expand this first one, we'll see that this is the content that we pulled out of the Virginia Department of Health's COVID-19 FAQ page from the web. And you'll see that it pulled out both the questions and the answers from that web page. Now there's something important to understand here. The most effective knowledge bases are ones that have questions that are worded in a way that you would expect the audience to likely ask those questions. So it's often the case that traditional FAQs that you'll find on the web page are written for that medium, and they tend to be ones in which they have very technical questions with very technical answers. Fine for the web, but it's not how people speak. And so when you import an FAQ from the web, you're going to want to look over both questions and answers for correctness, for sure, but also to make sure that they're worded in a way that makes sense. So when you test Q&A Maker and you ask it questions the way that users are going to ask questions and it doesn't match with the right answers, you can come in here and click the Add Alternative Phrasing, and then you can add that question in here. And then Q&A Maker becomes aware that there's another way that this question could be asked, and then it will give the right answer back. So testing will really entail two things: adding the alternative phrasings where necessary, and also adding question-answer pairs when you ask questions that your Q&A Maker knowledge base doesn't currently have an answer for it, right? So you identified a legitimate question that doesn't have an answer. And that's the next thing we'll actually look at. But before I do that, before I add a new entry, let me just mention that you can edit the answers, even to the externally imported FAQs, as I'm doing here, if you care to. Oh, and by the way, let me collapse this down. If you want to add alternative phrasings to content that you created and imported, it works the same way as you just saw here, right? So whether you're adding alternative phrasings to external content that you imported, or if you're adding alternative phrases to content that you authored and imported, it works the very same way. All right, now we can address the question of adding new content. When I need to add a new question and answer pair, I'll go up and click the Add Q&A Pair link. This will open an entry field, as you can see here, where I can enter both the question portion as well as the answer portion. And of course, I can provide an alternative phrasing if I care to. It's worth mentioning that our answer field supports Markdown. If you're not familiar with Markdown, you can do a quick web search and use the keywords Markdown syntax, and there's a lot of resources that explain what it is and how you use it. Now, I've got a few examples here that will show you the effect of using this Markdown syntax for styling the answers in a richer way, and doing things like, say, a URL link. That's what you'll use Markdown for, and you'll see how that works here in a second when I show this in the test pane. So now that we've imported content and made a few changes, it's time now to test our knowledge base out. So let's use that test pane that I was just mentioning. So anytime you've made changes to the knowledge base, you'll need to save and retrain before you go to the test panel. So let's do that now. Alright, that's done. Now we can press the test button. It brings up a test pane, and we can use this test pane to type in questions and test out the knowledge base. So we'll go down in here, and we'll go ahead and type our question to try this out. Not surprisingly, that worked. We entered the question exactly as we entered it in the knowledge base. This time, let's enter a question in a way that Q&A Maker hasn't seen before. Great, so that worked. This shows Q&A Maker's natural language processing capabilities that allows it to understand the meaning of what's said so that it can still match to the answer even when what's said was something that it hadn't seen before. So now we're done testing, and I'll close the test panel by just hitting the test button again, and now we'll move on to publishing it. To do that, you'll switch over to the Publishing tab here, and then you'll simply click the Publish button right here. Now this will take a minute, but when it finishes, our changes will become accessible. There, it's published. Okay, so this leads to a really important question. How will people access this knowledge base we just created? Q&A Maker itself doesn't have a user interface. It's a knowledge base that's accessed through web service calls. So you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, weren't we just in the test pane typing in questions? What's the matter with that? Well, that test pane is not publicly accessible. So how will users access this knowledge base? Probably the easiest way to do that is to create a chatbot and connect it to your knowledge base. And actually, it's not all that hard to do. Let me show you how to do that. Conveniently located on this Publish page is this Create Bot button, and if I click it, it will send me to the Azure portal where I will create a pre-configured bot that is already wired up to connect to our knowledge base. The only configuration setting we'll want to change here is the app service plan. We'll want to go ahead and create one of those for our new Q&A bot. So I'll go ahead and hit the Create New button here, and I'm fine with the name, and I'm keeping everything in the same location, and for me, that's in East US. So there you have it. That's all I need. I'll go ahead and click OK. There, we're ready to create our Q&A bot, so I'll just click the Create button. Okay, that'll take a little bit to deploy, so let me open up this notification panel so we can keep track of things and know when it's done. Alright, it's done, so I'm going to click this Go to Resource button, and it's going to take us to the chatbot it just created. The chatbot also has a test panel, so we're going to use that now to make sure that our chatbot is properly connected to our knowledge base. So if I click this Test in Web Chat, I'll get the test pane here, and I can type in a question to see how the knowledge base responds. Excellent, that's working. So let me try the Markdown question, see how that works. So everything's working. The last step here is to make the bot public. Now, there are a number of ways you could do that. You could publish it to your home page or publish it to messaging clients like Microsoft Teams or Skype or Facebook Messenger, Slack, GroupMe, Kik. Even SMS can be used. You could send text messages to this bot, so it's very flexible. So I've clicked the Channels blade here in the Azure portal, and it shows all the channels that you could enable. And the way this works is you'll click a channel, and then you'll provide the configuration information that channel needs, and then your bot will appear as a person in that channel. So if it's Facebook Messenger, your bot would appear as a person in that channel, and then people would be able to talk to that bot just like they talk to another person. Now, given the non-developer focus of this video, coupled with the fact that a COVID-19 public service bot will be serving users anonymously with fully public content, I'll show you how a Q&A bot can be embedded in any HTML web page, like a home page, for example. So to embed a bot in a web page, we'll use the web chat channel. We'll need to click this Get Bot Embed Code links, and that will take us to a dialog here, and we'll have to chase down one more link, and this will take us to a configuration page where we can get the HTML snippet that we're looking for. Now, the embed codes is here in the middle of the page, and I'll use this copy here to go ahead and grab those. And then what I thought I'd do is switch over to Visual Studio, where I have a very basic website that I'll use just to show you how this works. So here's a web page. It's got some default HTML on it, which I'm going to highlight and delete to make room for our HTML snippet, which I'm going to paste in right here. You can change the style of this snippet that we pasted in here to fit your web page. I'm going to change the size of it, for example, but craft it in whatever way makes sense for the page that you're embedding it in. Now, the next thing we need to do is to replace this placeholder text with our bot secret. So now I'll hop back over to the Azure portal, and then I'll go up to the secrets field here. I'll have to hit show so that I can copy the secret. Then I'll do a little quick copy right here, and then it's back over to Visual Studio so I can replace that secret. So I'll just go ahead and delete the placeholder text here, and now I'll paste in the secret. Okay, so excellent. We've got that all in there, and now we're ready to run the app. Okay, so I've launched the app, and here's the web chat control on our web page, and it's ready for us to test out. So let's type a question in here and see how we do. Now I'll do our show markdown, see how that works. So there you have it. You have a Q&A Maker knowledge base that's connected to a chat bot that can be placed on any web page, all with no code.